The dirt was still fresh, dark and uneven, like the earth itself hadn't finished grieving. The headstone was still clean, too clean, its letters sharp and new, as if death had just learned her mother's name and was still getting used to it. Wind slid through rows of black coats and folded umbrellas, brushing against fabric like a whisper of judgment, like the world leaning in to watch something it had no right to witness. She stood there with her hands folded in front of her, fingers locked so tight they ached, nails pressing into skin she barely felt. Her eyes were swollen, red, empty in a way that scared her. Her heart felt cracked open, split down the middle, exposed to the cold air. This was supposed to be the one place she didn't have to explain herself, the one moment where pain was allowed to be quiet. Grief was supposed to be sacred, silent, untouched. Instead, it became a courtroom. He stood too close, close enough that she could smell his cologne cutting through the damp scent of soil and flowers, close enough that his shadow fell across the grave before the sun could. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't wait for the pastor to finish stepping back. He didn't care that her mother's name was still echoing in the air. He laughed. It started soft, almost like a breath that slipped out by mistake. Then it grew sharper, louder, cruel. The sound landed hard in the space between them, bouncing off silence like it wanted witnesses. "Look at you," he said, slow and deliberate, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. He took in the simple black dress she had worn for years, the one she saved for funerals and church. He noticed the scuffed shoes she couldn't afford to replace. He noticed what wasn't there. No jewelry, no designer bag, no signs of wealth to soften the moment. "Even at your own mother's funeral," he continued, shaking his head, "you still look poor." The word hung in the air, heavy, ugly, final. People froze. Conversation stopped mid-breath. Someone's phone slipped from their hand and hit the ground, the sound too loud in the sudden quiet. Heads turned slowly, one by one, like an audience realizing they were part of a scene they couldn't leave. She didn't cry, not then. She didn't scream. She didn't ask him how he could. Her face didn't move at all. She just stared at the grave, at the carved letters of her mother's name, as if her mother could hear every word and she didn't want to look away while it happened. As if turning toward him would somehow make it more real. Her mother had taught her that silence could be armor, that not every insult deserved a reply. That dignity wasn't loud, it was steady. He mistook that stillness for weakness. "You hear me?" he said, his voice rising, feeding off the attention. "I married you thinking things would change, that you'd grow, that you'd become more." He scoffed and gestured around them, at the modest crowd, the simple service, the lack of luxury. "But this?" He laughed again. "This is all you ever bring, nothing." Her chest tightened, but she kept breathing, in and out, slow, controlled. Each breath felt like work. Then he did it, right there, in front of God, in front of her mother, in front of everyone who had come to mourn. "I'm done," he said, pulling a folded stack of papers from his coat like it was something he'd been waiting to use. "I didn't marry poverty. I didn't sign up for this life." He held the papers out, not gently, not respectfully, but like a receipt being returned. Divorce, final, cold. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one stepped forward. No one spoke. It was easier to watch than to intervene. Easier to pretend this wasn't happening at a graveside. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses on your ears until they ring, the kind that makes your heart beat louder than it should. She looked at the papers, white against all that black. Clean lines, sharp signatures, a life reduced to ink and margins. For a moment she thought of the night they met, of the way he had smiled at her ambition, her patience, her calm, of the promises he made when her world was smaller and her dreams were quieter, of how he said he admired her strength, her ability to make something out of nothing. None of that mattered now. She took the pen someone handed her. Her hand didn't shake, her fingers didn't hesitate. She signed her name where it told her to, the letters neat and steady, as if this was just another form, another task. She didn't beg. She didn't ask for time. She didn't say a single word. The sound of the pen scratching against paper felt louder than his laughter had. She handed the papers back. His smile spread, satisfied, relieved, convinced he had just escaped a burden, convinced he had chosen himself. He tucked the papers away, already moving on in his mind, already telling a different version of this story. As he turned and walked away, shoulders lighter, steps confident, he didn't notice the older woman standing at the edge of the crowd. She stood apart from the others, her coat buttoned tight, her posture straight. Her hair was silver, pulled back neatly, her face lined with years and restraint. Her eyes followed him, not with anger, not with pity, but with something sharper, something measured, like she was taking notes. She had arrived quietly. She would leave the same way. No one noticed her because no one was looking for her. The service ended in fragments. People offered soft condolences, careful not to mention what they had just seen. Some hugged her briefly, awkwardly, like they were afraid grief might be contagious. Others avoided her eyes altogether, already filing her away as a woman whose life had just fallen apart in public. She thanked them politely. She nodded. She accepted the hugs she was given and released them quickly. Her body moved through the motions while her mind stayed at the grave. When the crowd thinned and the last car pulled away, she stood there alone. Just her and the fresh dirt and the quiet that finally came back. The wind softened. The sky seemed lower. "I'm still here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was saying it to. Her mother, herself, the world. She knelt and smoothed the soil with her hand, careful, tender. The earth was cold, real, final. What no one there knew, what no one could imagine, was that this grave wasn't just a place of loss. It wasn't just the end of a life that had looked small from the outside. It was the closing of a chapter that had been written in silence. Her mother had always been private, always careful. She paid cash, asked no questions, never spoke about the past. She taught her daughter how to save, how to wait, how to move without drawing attention. She taught her that the loudest people were often the least prepared. As a child, she used to ask her mother why they lived so simply, why they never moved, never upgraded, never chased what others chased. Her mother would smile and say, "Everything doesn't need to be seen to be real." Standing there now, the words came back heavier. The older woman at the edge of the crowd watched her kneel, watched her smooth the dirt, watched the way. She carried herself even after being cut open in public. There was approval in her eyes, recognition. Power often hides behind humility. Wealth often wears quiet clothes, and the world has a habit of confusing modesty with lack. The man who walked away believed he had won. He believed he had chosen power over burden, comfort over struggle. He believed poverty was something you could see in shoes and dresses and funerals without flowers. He never thought to ask what was buried beneath the surface. He never thought that the same ground he had disrespected would one day rise up and speak. And when it did, it wouldn't shout. It wouldn't beg for attention. It would simply exist, waiting. Just like her. The whispers didn't stay at the grave. They followed her home like a second shadow, lighter than grief, but sharper in places it touched. They slipped through phone calls she didn't answer, and messages she read but never replied to. They lived in pauses, in sighs, in the way people spoke her name like it now carried a warning. Poor thing. She married above her level. He finally came to his senses. The words traveled faster than truth ever does, shaped by mouths that didn't know her but felt certain they understood her story better than she did. Friends chose sides without announcing it. Some stopped calling. Some sent short messages full of soft lies, saying they were busy, saying they hoped she was okay, saying "let me know if you need anything," knowing she wouldn't. A few chose him openly, laughing at his jokes, nodding along when he explained himself. He told the story first. That mattered. He always believed whoever spoke first controlled the room. He said she was a financial burden, a weight he carried too long. He said love doesn't survive lack, like love was a business deal that failed to turn profit. He said ambition needs a partner who can keep up, and people nodded like he was stating a law of nature instead of exposing his own fear. She heard these things later, through others, through fragments that found their way back to her. She never corrected them, never asked anyone to defend her. Silence had become her language, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood something they didn't. Loud explanations are for people who are unsure of their truth. She knew hers. She had lived it. She had breathed it in small rooms and long nights. She didn't need to sell it. Life shrank after the funeral, not suddenly but steadily, like a room losing air. She woke up earlier, stayed out later, took shifts no one wanted. She worked longer hours and learned how tired a body could be without stopping. She stopped driving when the car needed repairs she couldn't afford. She took buses instead of cars, standing most days because she never timed it right to get a seat. She learned the rhythm of public transit, the way the city rocked forward and back, the way strangers avoided eye contact while sharing the same space. She ate late, if she ate at all. She slept little, her mind never fully resting. grief sitting beside her every night like a quiet guest who refused to leave. Grief didn't scream, it didn't break things, it just stayed, heavy, constant. It reminded her of her mother in ways that surprised her, the way she folded towels, the way she paused before answering questions, the way she counted change without looking. Every small habit carried memory now, and memory carried weight. At work, she kept her head down. She smiled when spoken to. She said yes more than she should have. One afternoon, she walked past the break room and heard laughter spill out into the hall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for her. That made it worse. "Imagine being divorced at your mother's grave," one voice said, amusement tucked inside cruelty. Another voice answered without hesitation, "That's what happens when you bring nothing to the table." Laughter followed, quick and careless, like stones tossed into water they didn't have to swim in. She didn't stop walking. Her steps stayed even. Her face didn't change, but something inside her tightened, not in pain but in clarity. She brought everything. She always had. Patience, support, labor no one saw. Love that didn't ask for applause. She brought consistency to chaos. She brought calm to ego. She brought loyalty to a man who believed it was owed, not earned. They just never counted it. People rarely count what they don't know how to use. Bills began to stack up in neat piles she pretended not to see. Envelopes waited on the table like silent witnesses. Lawyers called with voices trained to sound polite while asking for more. He demanded what little she had left, not because he needed it, but because he could. Because power likes to remind you it exists. Because taking from someone who has less feels like proof of winning. Each demand carried his name, his signature, his certainty that she would fold. She didn't. She adjusted. She cut back. She learned how to stretch time and money until both felt thin. She sold things she once thought she'd keep forever. She canceled plans before they could be made. She lived smaller without shrinking herself. There is a difference, and she knew it well. Online, she said nothing. She never defended herself publicly, never posted explanations, or pain dressed up as strength. She didn't write long paragraphs hoping someone would finally understand. She carried her dignity like a secret weapon, unseen but sharp, kept close but never displayed. People mistook her silence for shame. They always do. It made them comfortable. It allowed them to continue believing the story they preferred. At night, when the city slowed and her phone stopped buzzing, she thought about her mother, not the end, not the grave, but the woman who raised her in quiet rooms and taught her how to listen more than speak. Her mother had been many things in her life: provider, protector, teacher. She had also been quiet, private, invisible to a world that only noticed noise. She never talked about work, never talked about money. She lived simply on purpose, not because she had to. She taught her daughter to do the same. As a child, she used to think it was fear. Fear of standing out, fear of losing what little they had. Now she understood it was discipline, strategy. Her mother believed in keeping her cards close, in letting people underestimate her. She believed attention was expensive. She believed safety lived in the shadows. The powerful often ignore quiet people. They step over them, speak over them, dismiss them. They mistake stillness for emptiness and humility for lack. They don't look twice, they don't ask questions, they move on, certain they've seen all there is to see, until the moment they realize silence was never weakness. It was preparation. She carried that lesson with her now, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Each day felt like walking uphill with eyes on her back. Each small win went unnoticed. Each sacrifice went unpraised. But something was forming beneath the surface, slow and steady. Not anger, not revenge, awareness. She was learning who people were when they thought she had nothing to offer. She was learning who stayed kind when kindness had no reward. She was learning the cost of being underestimated and the power hidden inside it. He moved on quickly, or at least made sure it looked that way. New dinners, new laughter, new confidence. He spoke about fresh starts like he invented them. When people asked about her, he shrugged and said some people just don't grow. He never mentioned the nights she stayed up with him when he doubted himself. He never mentioned the sacrifices she made so he could look successful in rooms she was never invited into. Those details didn't fit the version of himself he was selling. She watched from a distance, not out of longing but curiosity. She wanted to understand how easily someone could rewrite history when it benefited them, how applause could make lies feel like facts. It hardened something in her, not her heart but her resolve. She fed expecting fairness. She started focusing on survival. There were nights she cried quietly, face pressed into a pillow so the sound wouldn't escape. Not because she missed him, but because being misjudged hurts in a place that logic can't reach. Being reduced to a story you didn't write leaves a bruise that takes time to fade. Still, she woke up every morning and went back into the world that had decided who she was without asking. And the world kept agreeing with cruelty. It rewarded him with sympathy and her with silence. It praised his honesty and called her resilience pride. It asked him how he was doing and asked her what she did wrong. Each interaction added pressure, but pressure can either crush you or shape you. She let it shape her. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know how close the truth was to the surface. She didn't know how quickly the balance could shift when quiet meets timing. All she knew was that her mother's lessons were still working, still protecting her, still guiding her steps even now. Silence had carried her this far, and it wasn't done yet. The world believed it had already decided her place, believed the story was over, believed nothing new could come from a woman who rode buses and kept her head down and signed divorce papers without a scene. They believed that because it made them comfortable. But comfort has a way of blinding people, and somewhere, beneath all the whispers and laughter and judgment, something waited, patient, unseen, ready to speak when it mattered most. The call came on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that doesn't warn you it's about to change your life. The phone buzzed while she stood at the sink, staring at a chipped mug she had owned longer than her marriage. She almost let it ring. Unknown number. Those usually carried bad news or more demands. When she finally answered, the voice on the other end was calm, trained, polite in a way that felt expensive. A law firm, they said. Her mother's name followed. The tone shifted. Urgent, insistent, respectful but firm, like they were used to being taken seriously. She almost hung up. For a moment she thought it was a mistake. Or worse, a trick. People didn't call her with opportunities. They called her with bills, with reminders, with warnings. She said she was busy. The voice asked when would be better. She paused, then said Friday, already regretting it. When the call ended, the kitchen felt too quiet. The hum of the fridge sounded louder. Her heart beat faster than it should have. She shook her head and told herself not to imagine things. Hope had disappointed her enough times to earn her doubt. By Friday, she was sitting in a glass office overlooking the city, the same city that had dismissed her without a glance. The same skyline she used to watch from the bus window, her reflection faint against buildings she felt she would never enter. Now she sat inside one of them, hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes alert. The chair was soft, too soft. The room smelled like polish and quiet confidence. She felt out of place and completely present at the same time. A man in a tailored suit sat across from her. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if every word mattered. He didn't rush. He didn't assume. At one point he stopped and looked at her carefully like he was trying to read her face. Then he reached into a folder and slid an envelope across the table. It was thick, heavy, final, the kind of envelope that carried weight even before it was opened. Her mother's name was printed in bold. She stared at it longer than necessary. Something in her chest tightened. Her hands moved on their own, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. It felt real, too real. When she finally opened it, the room seemed to tilt. Words blurred. Numbers stood out. She blinked, once, twice, then looked up like someone might laugh and tell her it was a test. What followed felt unreal, like stepping into a story that had been happening without her knowledge. Her mother hadn't been poor. She had been hidden, an early investor, a silent partner, a woman who trusted no one with numbers but herself. While others talked, she watched. While others spent, she waited. She had placed her money quietly, carefully, in places no one paid attention to at the time, companies that were small, ideas that were ignored, people who were underestimated, just like her. The lawyer explained timelines, documents, years of planning, safeguards, silence by design. Her mother had made sure everything was protected, anonymous, untouchable. She never wanted attention, never wanted questions. She wanted control, she wanted peace. And she wanted her daughter safe in a world that treated loudness like value and humility like weakness. The inheritance totaled just over $100 million. The room went quiet, though no one had spoken. Even the city outside seemed to pause. Her hands shook, not from greed, not from excitement, but from understanding. Every sacrifice suddenly made sense. Every second-hand choice. Every night her mother said no and others said yes. Every lesson about patience, about quiet, about waiting. It all lined up like dots finally connected. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. This wasn't shock alone, it was recognition. Her mother hadn't lived small, she had lived precise. She had moved through the world unseen on purpose, building something no one thought she was capable of. And now, sitting in that room, her daughter felt the weight of that trust settle onto her shoulders. News travels fast when money speaks, faster when it shocks. The story broke quietly at first, buried in business pages no one read until someone noticed the name. Then it spread. A daughter, an inheritance, a number too large to ignore. Phones buzzed, emails flew. People who had never said her name suddenly learned how to pronounce it. He found out through a headline, then another, then a message from someone who said, "Is this about you?" The words didn't register at first. He read them again, slower. His chest tightened the way hers had days earlier, but for a different reason. Confusion turned into disbelief. Disbelief turned into panic. He searched her name. He searched her mother's. He read until his hands started to sweat. The call he made later that night was one he didn't deserve to make. Weeks passed before he showed up. She hadn't expected him to. She hadn't invited him. But she wasn't surprised. People like him always came back when they realized what they had misjudged. He stood in her doorway, posture stiff, smile forced, apologetic, sweating, smaller somehow. The confidence he once wore so easily now slipped at the edges. He said he made a mistake, said grief had clouded his judgment, said he was under pressure, said love was more important than money, like that truth had just occurred to him. He talked about second chances, about growth, about how people change. She listened, calm, still. The way she always did when someone revealed more about themselves than they intended. She noticed how he avoided her eyes at first, then tried too hard to hold them. She noticed how his hands fidgeted, how his voice softened when he said her name. When he finished, silence filled the space between them, not heavy, not angry, clear. She stood, walked to the table, and picked up a folder. Inside were the same divorce papers he had dropped on her grief weeks ago. Already signed, final, cold. She placed them gently in front of him, the way one might place a truth that didn't need force. "Poor," she said softly, meeting his eyes for the first time since he arrived, "is not having money." Her voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it landed. "It's knowing someone's worth," she continued, "and choosing to walk away." He stared at the papers, then at her, then back at the papers. The room felt smaller, now like the walls had moved in to listen. For the first time since the grave, he understood what he had done. Not just what he had lost, but what he had revealed about himself. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she didn't need to. Power had shifted quietly, the way it always does when truth finally stands up, and as he realized there was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix, she felt something settle inside her. Not revenge, release. Because some lessons don't arrive with anger or noise, they arrive with clarity, with dignity, with the kind of silence that speaks louder than anything money ever could. She didn't buy revenge. That was the first thing people expected, and the first thing she refused. When the numbers settled and the lawyers stopped calling and the shock wore off, she didn't feel the urge to hurt anyone back. She didn't feel the need to prove a point with cruelty. What she wanted was quieter than that. What she wanted was peace. And peace, she learned, costs less than revenge but pays more in the long run. She bought a home, not a mansion with gates and cameras, but a place that felt solid, a place where the floors didn't creak with doubt and the walls didn't feel temporary. Sunlight filled the rooms in the morning, and at night the silence felt earned, not lonely. She took her time choosing it, walking through spaces slowly, listening to how they felt. She wanted somewhere her mother would have approved of, simple, thoughtful, strong. She set up scholarships in her mother's name, quiet ones that didn't come with press releases or ceremonies. She didn't want stages or applause. She wanted impact. She wanted students who reminded her of herself, who carried potential the world didn't bother to look for. She funded programs that helped people build skills, not egos. She gave without cameras watching, because she knew something most people never learn. Giving changes the giver more than the receiver when no one is counting. Her philanthropy was intentional and private. No announcements, no interviews, no speeches about how far she had come. She moved through the world differently now, not louder, not crueler, just clearer. She listened more than she spoke. She watched patterns instead of reacting to moments. Money didn't change her values, it revealed them. People treated her differently, even when they didn't know why. They stood a little straighter when she entered rooms. They listened longer. They asked questions instead of making assumptions. She noticed it all, and she remembered how easily those same people once looked past her. That memory kept her grounded. It kept her careful. He watched from afar. At first, he pretended not to care. He told himself he had moved on, that her success was just luck, that it didn't mean anything about him. But he watched. He couldn't help it. He saw her name appear in places he once imagined his own. He saw invitations she didn't brag about, partnerships she didn't announce. He watched her reputation rise quietly while his began to shrink in subtle ways that hurt more than public failure. Doors opened for her that would never open for him again, not because she blocked him. She never had to. His own choices had done that work. People remembered how he treated her. They remembered the story that followed him, the one he thought he controlled. Power circles have long memories, and they don't like people who mistake cruelty for confidence. The irony burned in places he didn't know how to cool. He divorced her because he thought she was poor, and he lost her because he was. Poor in patience, poor in character, poor in vision. He had measured life by surface shine and missed the depth entirely. There was no public confrontation, no dramatic reunion, no viral apology video where he suddenly learned the right words, just consequences, quiet ones. The kind that settle in slowly and don't leave, the kind you live with. She never spoke badly about him in public. She didn't need to. His silence did enough. His absence from rooms where he once felt important said more than any accusation ever could. She focused forward, not backward. That was her real victory. Months later, on a day with soft light and no schedule, she visited her mother's grave again. This time she went alone. No crowd, no whispers, no eyes watching. The grass had grown in now, covering the raw edges of the earth. The headstone no longer looked new. It looked settled, like it belonged. She placed flowers gently at the base, taking care to straighten them. She stood there longer than she had before, breathing in the quiet. A sad smile crossed her face, not from pain but from understanding. She whispered, "Thank you, not for the money, never for the money, but for the lesson." Her mother had taught her everything she needed long before the world tried to tell her she had nothing. She taught her that true wealth doesn't announce itself. It waits, it watches, it grows in silence while others chase noise. It doesn't beg for validation or rush to prove anything. The world has a habit of mistaking humility for lack, silence for emptiness, dignity for weakness. It does it every day, to people who move carefully, who don't need to be seen to know who they are. And the world keeps making the same mistake because it's easier than looking deeper, until one day, the truth stands up quietly, no spotlight, no warning, and everything changes. She left the grave feeling lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because it was finally understood. She walked back into her life with steady steps, carrying everything she had earned and everything she had chosen not to show. And if there was one lesson her story offered the world, it was this: never measure someone's value by what they show you. Some people are carrying entire empires inside them, built in silence, protected by patience, waiting for the right moment. And they don't owe anyone proof.